I almost didn't go that afternoon. The letter from the estate agent had come on a Tuesday. A general invitation to a public viewing of Caldermere Hall, the old Renwick property at the edge of the village, which had stood empty for the better part of a decade and was now, at last, to be sold. I had driven past the gates 100 times over the years, and always noticed, without quite registering, that they were still padlocked, the stone pillars mossy, the long drive beyond them invisible under the shadow of the avenue of limes. It was the kind of house that had always seemed to be waiting for something, though I could not have told you what. As the parish's volunteer archivist, I had a professional interest. I wanted to photograph the library shelves before the developers stripped them, and I had a vague hope of recovering whatever local records the family might have left behind. The Renwicks had owned land in this valley for 3 generations, and whatever remained of their correspondence, their household accounts, their private ledgers, had a place in the parish collection, if I could get to it before the house clearance did. I was not there to buy. I was not even there, if I'm honest, to be moved. I arrived to find perhaps 15 people gathered in the gravel drive, a young couple with a surveyor's notebook, 2 men in suits whom I took for investors, a pair of elderly siblings who had grown up near the Renwick estate and had come, I suspected, for the same reason I had, nostalgia dressed up as purpose, and there was Callum Driscoll, the property developer, who had acquired the site and was conducting the viewing himself, all bright teeth and brisk authority, steering the group through the ground floor with the casual confidence of a man who had already decided what the house was worth. What the house was worth to him was a number. He said it several times in different ways. Walking behind the group, slightly apart from it, was a woman I recognized at once, though I had not seen her in some years. Her name was Miriam Pell. She was in her late 60s now, with close-cropped silver hair, and the unhurried posture of someone who has learned that patience is a form of strength. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder and wore the kind of clean, practical coat that suggests a person who is always ready to work. She had been the live-in caretaker of Caldermere Hall for nearly 4 decades, the last person the Renwick family had trusted with their home, and she had stayed on after the family's departure, maintaining what she could on what little the estate agent had provided for upkeep. I had met her twice before at village events, once at the harvest supper, once at the church restoration committee, and on both occasions she had struck me as someone who said far less than she knew. She walked the corridors now like a woman returning to a house she had never left, which was precisely what she was. Driscoll, for his part, treated her the way people treat furniture, as a feature of the space, present but unremarkable. We reached the drawing room last. It was a large room on the south side of the house, overlooking what had once been a formal garden, now a tangle of grass and box hedging gone wild. The walls were paneled in dark oak, the shutters half drawn, the afternoon light falling in pale strips across the parquet floor, and in the far corner, half draped in a dust sheet that had slipped partly off one end, stood the piano. It was a Bosendorfer grand, or had been once. The ivory of several keys had yellowed and lifted at the corners. A long crack ran through the finish of the right-hand panel of the case. The lid was down. The bench was pushed in close, at an angle, as though the person who had sat there had stood in a hurry and never come back. But the instrument had not been allowed to gather true dust. Someone had been wiping it down. Someone had kept the worst of the damp away from the soundboard. I knew, looking at it, who that someone had been. Driscoll was talking about the room's dimensions, about natural light, about the structural integrity of the original plasterwork ceiling. One of the men in suits was measuring the alcove where the bookshelf stood. Miriam had walked straight to the piano. She did not make a production of it. She simply lifted the dust sheet from the keys, folded it carefully over the music stand, and rested one hand on the fallboard. Driscoll noticed. "Mrs. Pell," he said, in the tone people use when they want to remind someone of their place without appearing to. "I'd leave that. The instrument hasn't been serviced in years. It's probably unplayable." "I know," she said. "Then let's leave it as a feature. Potential buyers will use their imagination." He smiled at the room, inviting the group to share the joke. One of the women near the window laughed politely. Miriam looked at the fallboard a moment longer. Then she looked at Driscoll. "I've tuned this piano myself. Twice a year, every year for 38 years, she said. "The treble strings will be a touch sharp. The action is stiff in the upper register. Otherwise, it will play." There was a silence. "Well," Driscoll said, the smile still fixed, "perhaps you'd like to give us a demonstration then. Play us something, since you know the instrument so well." He said it the way people say things they expect to end in embarrassment. A careless dare, thrown out lightly, in front of an audience, to someone they do not believe will accept it. Miriam accepted it. She drew the bench back, sat down, and adjusted its height with 2 deliberate turns of the knob on the right side. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, not nervously, but the way a diver stands at the edge before a clean entry, gathering herself inward, unhurried. I found I had stopped taking notes. The young couple had stopped their surveying. Even Driscoll had taken a half step back. She placed her hands on the keys. What came out first was a single low note, a test. She had been right about the stiffness in the action, and she made a small, private adjustment, her right hand lifting and resettling. Then she began. Saint-Saens wrote the melody we now call the Swan for cello, but on the piano it begins as water, the left hand rippling in a continuous rocking figure, soft and deep, steady as breathing. The surface of something very still disturbed only gently, carrying something weightless above it. Miriam's right hand found the melody and brought it in without announcement, without ceremony, the way you might open a window onto something you've wanted a person to see. It was not a showy piece. That was the first thing I understood, watching her. This was not the piece you play to silence a room through force. This was the piece you play when you want to tell someone the truth very quietly, and you want them to feel lit before they know what it is. The drawing room changed. I do not mean the light shifted, though the afternoon had moved and a longer bar of gold now fell across the parquet. I mean the quality of attention in the room changed entirely. The man with the surveyor's notebook had let it fall to his side. The elderly siblings, a woman and her brother, were standing very close together, the way people do at funerals, not for warmth, but for steadiness. The young couple near the door had turned to face the piano, and the woman's hand had found the man's arm without either of them seeming to notice. Driscoll had not moved from where he stood. Miriam played without the sheet music. There was none, and without any appearance of effort that was, not wholly absorbed into the sound. Her hands knew this instrument the way you know a room you have lived in without light, by feel, by memory, by the particular give of the floor beneath your feet, every year for 38 years. The thought arrived in me slowly, the way things arrive when you are listening to music, that will not let you think quickly. The melody rose in the right hand, and the left hand held it, steadied it, rocked it forward through the phrase. There is a moment near the middle of the piece when the swan, if you imagine the swan, seems to falter slightly, to dip, to meet the water, rather than float above it. Miriam found that moment and let it breathe. She did not rush to the resolution. She sat inside the uncertainty of it, and the room sat inside it with her. I became aware that I was holding my breath. The final phrase is a descent. The melody steps down through the scale, gently, without drama, and the left hand's ripple slows and softens and finally goes still, one note at a time, until there is one low chord remaining, held, and then that, too, releases. Miriam lifted her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was not the silence of people who have nothing to say. It was the silence of people who have been given something so precise, so quietly spoken, that they are afraid a word will break it. The woman from the elderly pair, she must have been in her 70s, pressed a handkerchief to the corner of her eye. The young couple were still. Even Driscoll stood without speaking, his clipboard held loosely at his side, his bright professional manner somewhere on the floor behind him. After a long moment, the woman with the handkerchief said very quietly, "Mrs. Pell, how long have you played like that?" Miriam turned on the bench and looked at her with a small, even smile. "I came here as housekeeper in 1986, she said. Mrs. Renwick asked me at the interview whether I played. I said I had studied for 12 years. She said good. She'd always wanted the piano played in the evenings, so I played it." She paused. "Then Mrs. Renwick died, and the family came less, and then not at all. But I kept playing it. Someone had to keep the strings in condition." She looked at the keyboard once more. Then she folded the dust sheet back over the keys with care, covering them corner by corner, as she had probably done 10,000 times before. "I imagine the room could be something," she said to no one in particular. "With the right light and the shutters opened, this would be a beautiful house again." Nobody spoke. Not the couple with the notebook, not the investors, not the siblings, not the man who had been measuring the alcove. Miriam rose from the bench, tucked it back in at the precise angle she'd found it, and walked toward the doorway. Driscoll turned as she passed. "Mrs. Pell," he said. She stopped and looked at him. He opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again. Whatever he had planned to say, whatever professional smoothness he had intended to produce, seemed to have abandoned him. What came out was simply, "Thank you." She nodded once and walked out into the corridor. I stood for a moment in the drawing room doorway and looked back at the space before following. The dust sheet folded carefully over the keys, the bench set back at its precise angle, the long bar of afternoon light still lying quiet on the parquet. The silence that remained was not the silence of a room that is empty. It was the silence that stays after music, which is a different silence. Entirely. It holds the shape of what filled it. I followed the group through 2 more rooms after that, but I could not tell you now what was in them. What I remember is the drawing room. What I remember is the light on the parquet, and the sound of that left hand holding the melody up, steady and patient, and the way the whole room had leaned in without knowing it, drawn towards something that had been waiting in that house, quietly, for years. I walked out to the drive afterward and found Miriam standing at the edge of the gravel, looking back at the south face of the building. The late sun was on the stone. The garden beyond the low wall was going gold at the edges. "Did you know," I said, "that you would play today?" She considered this.
No, not until he said it.
And then she looked at me, and there was something in her expression, not triumph, not defiance, just a kind of settled peace, the look of someone who has put some things exactly where it belongs. "That piano hasn't been properly listened to in 30 years, she said. It deserved one more afternoon. She pulled her coat around her and walked to her car, and I stood on the gravel and watched the house for a long time. The windows on the south side caught the last of the light, the glass, and the silence behind it. I have been back to Caldermere Hall once since, on a parish records visit, after the sale went through. The drawing room has been repainted, the bookshelves are gone, but someone, I do not know who, has had the Bosendorfer properly restored. It stands uncovered in the same corner, its lid raised, the keys clean and white and waiting. I like to think they heard something in that room that afternoon, something worth keeping,